Hello and good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us for our Thursday afternoon webinar. My name's Matt. I'm actually the editor for TARGETjobs Law and editor for several other parts of TARGETjobs. So we're here to talk about careers today, and we're talking in specific about putting 2021 on your CV. We did one of these sessions last year, and we were sort of hoping we wouldn't need to do another one. But unfortunately, here we are, having completed Netflix several times over. So we thought we'd better help you try to fill in some of those gaps. Just to quickly go over the ground rules for anybody who's joining us for the first time, we have a question feed which shows up in a sidebar on your right-hand side. Please feel free to ask questions at any time. We will answer them at the end, but we just ask that you upvote the questions that you want to see answered. So we will start with the ones that have the largest number of upvotes, and we will work down from there. I'm going to introduce you to Joanne Smallwood, who is who's joined us for this webinar today. Joanne is with the graduate recruitment at Womble Bond Dickinson. Joanne, perhaps if you could tell us a little bit about the firm and what you do.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Matt. So as Matt mentioned, my name's Joanne Smallwood. I head up the early talent team at Womble Bond Dickinson. Very long words, so I'm just going to shorten it down to WBD, which you're all very welcome to do as well. It is a transatlantic law firm, and I've been with the firm itself for over 11 years now. So joined when it was a regional firm, we became national and now transatlantic. So we've had a few different names, a few different guises, but yeah, mostly full service commercial law firm with offices length and breadth of the UK and over the pond.
Thank you very much, Joanne. And you can actually read, I think we've still got one of the Womble Bond Dickinson trainees in TARGETjobs Law, so you can actually read their profile to find out a little bit more about their experience at the firm as well. So if we start out we just want to talk about how you would fill in a gap on a CV. And this is pre-pandemic. Like, how would we normally go about filling in gaps on a CV? So Joanne, perhaps because you've obviously got quite a lot of experience in graduate recruitment, if you could sort of give us some suggestions as to what we might do when a pandemic's not happening to fill in those gaps.
Yeah, to be honest, it's probably a similar approach to both. We fully appreciate that it is very difficult to get experience, even pre-pandemic, especially from a legal point of view. And for me, I always encourage students or anyone who's interested in a career in law is just to go out and experience as much as you possibly can and think outside of the box. So even if you're going into maybe a public gallery at the law courts or tribunals, it's just starting to get your kind of foot in the door and becoming accustomed to the kind of roles that you can apply for. But it's also building up your networks as well, because you can start chatting to people in the profession. But there's also different societies you can join. Obviously at university you have your traditional law societies, non-law societies, but I would encourage you to just go into groups that genuinely hold an interest that you have. I think those who go into law think everything has to circulate around law and have a connection to the legal profession, when actually if you think about the client base that we work with, it's so broad. Having an interest and knowledge outside of that really does help with regards to that relationship as well. So if you are genuinely interested in environmental issues or geography of people or history, all of that, it very much translates into the career as well. So for me, thinking what interests you and what are you going to enjoy should be the first thing, but then how can that translate into kind of highlighting that on your CV is the next thing. Because remember, when we come to the interview stage, we want to talk to a person, not a person who's a robot that's ticking off things, and that's like, you kind of lose yourself, unfortunately, with that kind of approach. So it is quite difficult, I fully appreciate, even before the pandemic, but there are things that you could do that maybe would circulate around your hobbies or your interests. And certainly that's why on our application form, we don't actually call it employment or work experience, we actually call it life history, because actually you get a lot of your transferable skills and the fact that you've grown as a person outside of the traditional experiences. So it could be that you're in the Army Cadets, or you are in a band, or I think someone's just popped up there that they've been producing music. All of that is giving you a skill set that you can transfer over to any graduate role. So just remember, you're actually probably getting quite a lot of experience, even though you don't feel like you're doing the traditional work experience and employment.
Thank you, Joanne. And I think that's quite, I would certainly find that very reassuring to see on an application form, life history, rather than particularly when it's a very competitive career and there's a lot of sort of very specific work experience that you can do. I think that is actually, would put you at your ease when you're applying. I think we should talk a little bit about how we can, fill in those gaps during a pandemic where maybe, like we've talked, you mentioned clubs and societies. Which is great when you're on campus and when university is happening. Normally you can be out there and you get roped into all sorts of things that maybe you only do a day, but then you could include that on your CV.
Yeah.
At the moment, it's obviously very difficult. And I think the one to highlight is probably networking, particularly with people at a firm, or it could be a company if you're not going into law. So, how you can fill in the gaps on networking and also your interests and things like, as you say, it's life history. Perhaps now we're not talking necessarily about employment. So what sort of things would you expect to see?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. I think when the pandemic first hit, I thought we were all going to come out of this bilingual, trilingual, being able to bake bread to a professional level. I don't know about what everyone else is like, but certainly I've basically just become a professional Netflix watcher. And that's not a bad thing, because we've all been through a very sort of life-changing experience going through all of this. And don't worry if you haven't suddenly got a list as long as your arms of online events that you've attended, because it is difficult, especially in the beginning. But there are lots of different things out there now. I think people have pivoted onto the online platform so quickly and in such innovative ways as well, which has really surprised me. And actually, I think it's a real positive that's come out of this situation. So things like they were originally Inside Sherpa, but Forage now, they do a lot of sort of virtual placements. Again, quite a lot of law firms are on there, but I would encourage you to maybe look at experiences outside of the law as well. Just touching on the points I made earlier, that we work with other people. We don't just work with lawyers. We do want you to experience things outside of the law. It could be that actually you've developed a hobby because you've had that extra spare time. We've all found ourselves maybe on furlough, and actually you have took something up, and remembering that actually that it has an impact on you as an individual, and you can talk about your resilience and going through this situation as well. So you could have took up running or walking or anything like that. And what we did actually as a business, we saw this as an opportunity because we weren't going the length and breadth of the country on planes, trains and automobiles to do a lot more online activities with universities we may not necessarily have been able to get to, simply because a lot of things happen during October and November, and there's only so much resource that we have as a business. So we took part in quite a lot of webinars, virtual events. You mentioned societies. For me, they did a fantastic job of actually trying to figure out how to still engage with firms and with their members. And I did a few virtual wine and cheese nights, which was good fun. And it was just great to see how students were using their imagination and how to kind of get involved. And I think it really does help, not only with putting those experiences on your CV, but it helps with that engagement piece. As much as we weren't in person and very much missed that, you were still engaging with different people. And I certainly found, from the beginning to kind of the end of the year, people were much more comfortable putting on their cameras to talk to me, or just putting their cameras on in general. To begin with, I was talking to a screen of black tiles with names on, which is slightly disconcerting because I wasn't sure if anyone was there or not. And so I think people are starting to feel a lot more, and it would be great to hear from everyone, feel a lot more engaged online. And I think going forward, what you'll find is a lot of graduate employers will blend the two together, because we very much like seeing you in person, but I think we understand the reach that we can have online. So there is quite a bit that you can do, and you don't necessarily have to put all of this down on your CV, but it just makes you feel a lot more confident and comfortable that you're still getting in front of possible employers. So you're starting to get an understanding as to who we are, because I think that was our main concern, was we are very similar in law with commercial law, that we are basically the same entity doing the same work for the same types of client, but our culture and values may differ slightly. And the only way you as a candidate can see that is is coming along to speak to us. So there was quite a lot of activity online, but again, not everyone has access to the platforms to be able to engage with that. So if you have a big gap because of the pandemic, honestly, from an employer's point of view, we've been through it as well. We fully appreciate that there's not going to be a lot on there. For me, I would then just talk about your experiences during that time. We always ask about things like adaptability and resilience. I mean, we've all shown that over the last 14, 15 months that we've had to adapt to new ways of working, our freedoms being taken away, having to become a lot more mentally resilient to get through all of this. So there's things to be able to talk about that you may not necessarily know how to put on your CV, but certainly you can talk about that during your interview or your assessment centre, because as employers, we will not expect 2020 and 2021 to be jam-packed full of experiences in the traditional sense.
Thank you very much. And I really want to get a little a kind of noise or an emoji or something every time someone mentions baking during the pandemic, because that seems to come up on every webinar. There are so many sort of useful things in there. I mean, that ability to get online and to be able to meet, it saves you from having to travel half the country, where maybe an insight day, you know, might have been, oh, that's going to be a really expensive ticket to London, and then I'm going to have to find a way to get home on time and everything else. Now you can just zip into it. And it does seem like it is going to persist post-pandemic. I mean, not entirely, obviously, not everybody is going to keep everything online. But you know, for anybody out there who's listening to this webinar, definitely do, you know, go out there and look. Even if it's not necessarily aimed at a graduate recruitment event, that some of the knowledge sort of based stuff that's out there, you know, this is what we do, this is a project we worked on, and they do a webinar about the kind of technical details behind it, usually open to as many people as can get registered for it. I think it's a really, really kind of good idea. And as you say, you know, thinking about what you've done, even if you don't feel like you've done a lot of things, you know, maybe you've been looking after unwell relatives, or you've been dropping off food to people in the community who, you know, can't go out because of COVID, or even if it's just how you get through your day, that resilience. And we've actually talked about this on a previous webinar for anybody who wants to go back to the employability webinars page on TARGETjobs. We talked about that in one of the skills sessions, that how resilience, this is the time you can really, really show your resilience. You know, how do you live with a situation that is this bad, that feels like it has nowhere that it's going, and still bring yourself to do something, to be able to motivate yourself. It doesn't need to be huge. You know, you don't need to be trying to solve world hunger from the comfort of your bedroom with a laptop, but just any way that you can get yourself through the day and get your career back on track, I think is really, really, really useful advice. Thank you so much. And actually, you said, you know, it segues quite nicely into our next talking point about leniency, which is something that comes up a lot. Is you know, how much are people expected to have on their CV? How much are they expected to talk about the last year or the last 2 years? You know, our employers, how is it? How do you deal with it? Is it, you know, someone has nothing? That's the question.
Yeah, even pre-pandemic, it's quite a difficult situation that you can find yourself in, because, so again, coming from, I can only speak on our behalf, but the reason we call it life history is because we know that not everyone has the same opportunities as everyone else, and we want to have a level playing field and offer people the opportunity just to talk about themselves and become an individual. I think that's the most important thing to allow you to do. And your experiences do allow you to do that. But even before pandemic, as I say, we shouldn't have expected you to have gone from secondary school to university to do all of these other extracurricular activities when you've got a massive workload with regards to your degree and your education. And the reason you've gone to university is to enjoy university life as well. So we want you to sort of embrace as many things as possible, but obviously then we're asking you to have a certain benchmark in academics. We want this, we're so demanding. But for me, you've got people who might have just one full-time job because they need to put themselves through university. You might have somebody who's a carer, and there's only so many hours in a day, and you can't necessarily join all of the societies. But it's not about the amount of experience that you've got. For me, it's more about how you talk about your experiences, and actually from a personal point of view as well, because we see a lot of people talk about teamwork and communication and attention to detail, which is obviously all of the sort of traits and behaviors that we kind of want to see in our trainees, because that's part of the job. but actually you need to talk about it from a personal point of view, because you're going to be one of over 200, 300, 2,000, 3,000 people, depending on the size of the law firm that you're applying to. And that's even more so at the moment. We saw a 75% increase in our applications this year because of obviously people find themselves without positions. So for me, don't worry about the amount of experience. Just talk about what experience you have in a way that's really reflective and personal to you. And that was, again, pre-pandemic. And then obviously currently we're still in that kind of strange flux transition of we're still waiting to know when we're going to get our freedoms. And even then, I think people will still be a little bit kind of cautious. So look at things. And I know Ellen has mentioned a really good point there on the sidebar about Open University courses. There's lots of different free courses out there, Eventbrite, things like that is really great, especially with your local area. And I go to a lot of different things like that. Little insight into me, but I love TED Talks. And so if anybody hasn't had the joy of a TED Talk, honestly, my attention span is that 15 minutes that they talk for. So even just things like that just start to make you a lot more comfortable and confident in yourself. And it doesn't necessarily have to appear on your CV, but it just makes you feel a lot more comfortable and confident going into a recruitment process. So as I say, don't worry if you don't have reams and reams, even before the pandemic or because of the pandemic. It's how you get the value from the experiences that you do have, I think, is more important.
Thank you. And that's really the key point. So I think there was an expectation when we've had this question in the past that when someone asks, well, will they show leniency if I just leave all that blank? And it's actually like, no, don't leave it blank. You need to say something, like you must have done something. Maybe you fixed your computer, or you fixed your car, or even, you've gotten into a routine that's allowed you to survive this. Put it down there in some way, like explain it. As you say, TED Talks.
Yeah.
I have spent my time trying to learn about everything from topic X to topic Z. I think it's a really good idea. It's a really useful way, and you're still learning, while you're doing that. We've talked about online courses as well before. I mean, it's obviously make sure if you're going to do something that's purely for yourself and it's just for your own sort of self-improvement, make a note of it, absolutely. Mm-hmm. But if you're looking to pick one because you're still sort of trapped in some form of lockdown, make sure it's relevant to the employer is the other one. If for example you would want something sort of reasonably law related. I mean, one of the beauty of having law firms on is you can be from a non-law background and go into it, as you say. But you may want to get something that just boosts your knowledge around that area or whatever area you're hoping to apply to. So thank you. I think all really sort of useful stuff. Are there any skills? We've talked a little bit about resilience, obviously being one of the key ones, but are there other skills that you'd say that lockdown is kind of ripe to develop at the moment?
Yeah, I think resilience is probably the big one, and it's something we've all asked for. And actually, it's always been quite difficult to demonstrate that before pandemic, I think. And so, again, I'm quite a positive person, so I always try and find the most positive thing out of pandemics and things like that. And there's quite a few. But behaviours, I think, it's always quite interesting. For me, certainly during the pandemic, you learn a lot about yourself because you're probably spending more time with yourself than you have done ever before, because you're not allowed to see anyone. But I think that communication piece and understanding that you do have maybe a bit more of a strength of person, which I suppose links into resilience as well, but that adaptability, that creativity side of things start to come out once we've kind of got through sort of the kind of different mindsets that you kind of find yourself in. You have to become a lot more creative in how you engage with people. You can see that even now the ways that we work are very different. So everyone kind of migrating online, which, as I say, is probably going to be basically what's going to happen in the future, because we're all talking about hybrid working now, and that we're not all going to be in the office 5 days a week. There will be some people who want to do that, and that's fine. You can flex, and so I think that is that creativity, that flexibility, that adaptability that's really come in. And to be honest, I think being a bit more considerate of other people. has come in. I think we are all prone to kind of think that everything that I'm doing is the most important thing and my deadline's the important deadline. And now, because you're all working slightly differently, and the person that you normally work with is not sat 2 doors down or sat in front of you, so you make the assumption that they're either busy or not busy because they're in the office, they're not in the office. All of that's kind of gone. And so you do have to be a lot more communicative with regards to picking up the phone, and don't hide behind emails and IMs and so many different platforms that you can engage with people now. And I think a lot of that, because you're missing it, not having the face-to-face, but communication and understanding how you communicate, I think, is a big one that's being developed a lot more. And again, I saw somebody talk about LinkedIn profiles. I don't. I'm on LinkedIn, but I don't go and stalk people or anything like that. But I think LinkedIn has become such a great way of that networking piece that you talked about before, Matt, where, because we can't network in person, and to be honest, did we really network in person beforehand? I think whenever you go to conferences and when there was a networking session, everyone sort of scurried away and started checking their emails, and it wasn't really that kind of as it was meant to be. Whereas now I think you have so many connections on LinkedIn, and it's such a great way of learning new things as well. If you haven't got time to kind of do online courses and things like that, sign up to certain groups on LinkedIn. There's so much information out there. It's really interesting. So yeah, I think there's been a lot, definitely resilience, but for me, creativity and communication has also been sort of at the top of my certainly learning and understanding how you can communicate better. But I think creativity and innovation that's come from that has been great.
And I think that's really hit on something, because I mean, even if we're talking very much in a workplace context where you're trying to instant message someone, or maybe they're busy, or maybe they've got childcare responsibilities, or maybe their cat's trampled the keyboard or whatever it might be. But it is also when you're looking for a job as well. At the moment, a lot of we've been through the phases of the online quizzes or the online pub quizzes. If you're involved in organizing something like that, if you're involved in participating in something like that, it shows that you have at least tried to reach out, to communicate, to get a little bit creative with the way that you interact with people. And we've actually just put an article up on TARGETjobs, which is about sort of putting video games on your CV as well. Now, obviously, you don't want to completely nerd out when you're going to an employer, but if you are organizing matches between people, there is some level of communication involved. If you're trying to get you're trying to communicate across different languages often, because if you're all connected on the internet, that sort of thing, there are things you can take from that will still look good on a CV. And that's where your creativity comes in, not only in what you've done in order to get those experiences, but in how you present them to a potential employer. Because obviously, you might be living in that nerdy world, but you need to explain that to someone who might not be. So I don't use nerdy in derogatory sense there at all, because I'm very much in that category, I think. So you mentioned LinkedIn as well being kind of a key network. I just wonder, do you get a lot of requests on LinkedIn? What sort of messages? How do people contact you? Because I think this is something we've talked about.
Yeah, I do. I get quite a few messages. And what happens is you get if you do events like this, and I will, obviously, you're more than welcome to link in with me after this, because I appreciate that there's lots of different questions that people have. But not everyone takes the opportunity to ask questions. And for me, as a recruiter, I see myself as a facilitator. I am not here to stop you from getting your job. I'm very much here to support you and to help you through a recruitment process. And so therefore, if you want to ask me a question, I'm very open and honest with the answers that I come back with. And what you've started to see more and more of is that students will actually comment on their experiences. So it could be that they've been on an assessment day, or they've come to a panel event like this, and they name check you, and we will always make sure that we kind of say thank you very much, and that's a form of engagement as well, because I think what you'll find is, for us as a business, you'll see a lot of our lawyers will be very engaged with LinkedIn and social media, certainly more so than I am. I mean, I'm terrible. I think I'm one of the only people on earth that doesn't have a Facebook page, which I find quite odd. I'm in recruitment and I'm not nosy enough to have Facebook. But for me, you just need to be, remember there is a professional etiquette to LinkedIn. It is very different to kind of, I suppose, social media, but it is a great way of just gaining just an understanding of how people talk to each other, in that way of use of plain English as well. What you still find on applications and CVs where people try and flower it up and make themselves sound lawyery, whys and wherefores and moreovers and things like that. And we just, honestly, we don't speak like that. And with LinkedIn, I think from a student and a candidate point of view, you can actually see how we communicate with our clients. And there's a lot of our client wins are always just on there before they're on any other kind of social media, or they're not on the website, but they're on LinkedIn. There's lots of engagement going on with LinkedIn. And for me, it's a great platform with however you want to engage with it, whether you want to link in with me and ask a question, or you just want to follow the firms that you're interested in, or you just want to follow the different people who you're interested in. As I say, for us, you don't have to just be legally focused. You remember that we work in sectors. The reason we work in sectors is because we want you to show an interest in that particular area, because that's how you're going to speak to your client. You're going to use their language. They're not interested in legal language. You're going to understand their worries and concerns and understand what's happening in their own market. So following certain groups on LinkedIn is always going to give you a bit more of an understanding of what's going on. And certainly for us, with firms who have quite a spread that we do, we don't want somebody who just wants to join WBD. We're interested in why you want to join WBD in London or Newcastle or Leeds. And so therefore using LinkedIn as an opportunity to find out what's happening in those local areas is a great way of joining things like your Chamber of Commerce or local enterprise business partnerships. All of that, all of those things are on LinkedIn. And it's just a great platform to just trawl through. Probably very similar to you when you were saying that you kind of get lost in this black hole of information. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. Before you know it, you've spent about 3 hours on there, and you come out with so much more knowledge and just really excited about something. And that at the minute is quite hard to do because you don't have that engagement. But LinkedIn, I think, is a great space to be able to do that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think it's sometimes when you're doing your research on a company or on a firm, and you get the insights posts, and they're always very good and they're always very polished. But sometimes if you're on LinkedIn and you're just sort of lurking in the shadows, following people, you'll get them writing little missives or little kind of sort of insights that you wouldn't get elsewhere. It's almost a sort of bit more of a personal interaction. And as you say, that could be for any sector. If you might be interested in the law, but if you're particularly interested in planning or something like that, you might want to be looking at local governments that are trying to develop certain plots, or environmentalist groups that are protesting about governments developing certain plots. And the thing you said about language as well. I mean, I think we had a barrister at one of the pupillage fairs who outright said, do not try to put Latin anywhere on your application, because apparently it's a really common thing. Yes, we're going to use lots of Latin terminology because we're sure that's what lawyers do. And it's just not the case. You still need to interact with people as human beings, and that Latin is not conducive to that. We've talked about on TARGETjobs as well, when people reach out to you on LinkedIn, is not to use the standard LinkedIn message, hello, I'd like to connect. And it's to have an elevator pitch, to explain to someone, hey, I'm a student, I'm studying this, I'm really interested in these aspects of this, and I want to know a little bit more about the firm or the company. And I think that is really useful. And as you say, people are usually quite willing, whether it's trainees or associates, to give up just a little bit of coffee time to have a chat.
Yeah.
Certainly, when I was a student, I was out there contacting reporters who I wanted to find out a little bit more about their job and their life, and they'd always have time for you, which was really, really surprising. People who are out in the Middle East or something were like, yeah, of course I can spare you time. Next time I'm back, I'll sit you down for a coffee. And as I got later on in my career, the same thing happens to me, and I'll always make time for people. It's usually quite a nice atmosphere once you sort of get used to that concept of just reaching out and sort of explaining who you are, get a little bit of 10-minute chat somewhere.
And it's a great sort of habit to get used to as well, because that's how you're going to build your client network. This is how you stay in touch. This is how you grow your reputation, your own personal brand. And so starting now, getting used to the platform and how you engage, and how you can be introduced, or all of the resources that are on there is just really helpful for your career in general. Even after you've gone through your kind of graduate and your training contract, you'll see there's a lot of lawyers on there that engage with their kind of client base and the industries that they work with, because they want to talk to their clients. They're not interested in talking necessarily to other lawyers and bigging up what they're up to other lawyers. They want our future client base to go, actually, Dada's done this, 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 and this. I saw that on LinkedIn. They're kind of passive, I suppose, not looking at your website and deciding who you want to ask to come and tender for your business. It could be that you've just seen a passing something on LinkedIn or a social media comment.
That's it, and it's laying the groundwork for that now, as you say, building your personal brand. And for anybody who wants a little bit of a guide to this, Google TARGETjobs, building your personal brand, LinkedIn profiles. We've got guides on how to do all this sort of thing. That's there, but you're laying the groundwork for what you're eventually going to have to do in professional life anyway. So I think that's really, and that can go on your CV, even if you feel you're not achieving anything in the pandemic. Get it on there. Okay, I just a little bit conscious of time, so I'm going to kind of compress down to our last. We just had a couple more talking points, which is what to do. What would you say to someone who's worried at the moment about their career, or what would you say to someone who's maybe getting rejected or doesn't get the job they want the first time? Should they just take anything on offer? What how to deal with that kind of feeling at the moment?
Yeah, it's not a nice feeling at all, even before all of this was happening. But I think it kind of is compounded just with everything that's kind of going on. You don't have that same level of network of support necessarily that you would have had previously. And do not lose heart would be my sort of comments, because unfortunately there are always more people applying for roles than there are roles. That doesn't mean that you're not necessarily going to get one or that you're not good enough. I, as a recruiter, I'm frustrated because I know that I'm losing really good people at each stage of our recruitment process, but unfortunately numbers play a massive part. And as I mentioned, our applications went up 75%. We're not special. I think everyone was very much around that same mark. So we had over 2,500 applications for 25 training contracts. And we are very much still recruiting. What you'll find with law actually is we've actually sailed through this quite unscathed, thankfully. We've kind of slowed things down, but things haven't ground to a halt. I think we very much learned from the crash back in 2007-8, where everything just stopped. Doors closed, everything, and then we obviously had this massive black hole of early talent that we didn't have coming through. That pipeline had stopped. So what you'll find is most law firms, we've moved online. We paused our initial recruitment because I was very, very optimistic, thinking, we'll be fine by summer. But we're actually in a strange position that with law, we tend to recruit 2 years in advance, so we don't have to necessarily move as quickly as some of the other graduate employers. So we've moved everything online. But I think everyone's more comfortable with online. So actually the recruitment process that we're going through at the moment for 22 and 23 is very smooth because people are comfortable being on Teams. They're comfortable being themselves, a lot more so than this time last year, which would be when we were going through the recruitment process. I don't think it's as doom and gloom as maybe some of the media outlets are necessarily saying. I think most places are maybe being a little bit more cautious, but there's definitely opportunities out there. Do not worry if you're going through a process and you get a regret. That is not a reflection on your ability. It's mostly a reflection on the number of applications that we've got per role. If you can, and I know it's quite difficult to get feedback, we have learned a lot through the pandemic with regards to communication with our candidates. So at the front end of most graduate recruitment, we aren't able to offer you individual feedback just simply because of the volumes of applications that we get. We would love to be able to do that. I'm sure all employers would love to do that, but we just don't have the resource to do that. So what we've started to do is run webinars, feedback webinars. So everybody who submitted an application and was unfortunately not successful, we invited you to join a webinar where we would run through what we'd like to see on your application, giving you some sort of things to think about, very similar to this, and asking you to go back and do some self-reflection. because that's what you need to do. Don't just go through a process and think, oh, well, I wasn't good enough. Go back over your application. What you might find is, oh, I've reread it. Maybe I should have restructured the sentence here. Actually, I've copied and pasted that from another application. I haven't changed the law firm's name. Unfortunately, there are still people who do that. And just go back over yourself if you can't get any feedback from the actual firms or employers. And you'll probably start to see, actually, there's things I can change and I can make this better. And we did the same with our video interviews. Those who didn't progress through the video interview stage, we set up some webinars for people to join. Not everyone did, and that's perfectly fine. But if you are given those types of opportunities, then take them. But otherwise, have a look over your application, your video interviews, and do some reflection and be honest as well. But use it as a learning curve, because we're all going through it. Most people, unfortunately, probably will get that regret first time round, and sometimes second time round. It just needed to go through the process to feel a bit more familiar with it, to feel a lot more comfortable with it. And I think sometimes people, especially when you're at university and you see your peers going through processes, you just think, oh, well, I'm supposed to do it now. And you already know in your own mind that actually I'm probably not ready for it, or I've still got some doubts as to whether that's the career path I want to go down. That's not the frame of mind that you should have when you go into a recruitment process. So do not start something unless you feel confident and comfortable. Make sure you pick the right firm or employer that you want to apply to as well. Don't apply to every Tom, Dick or Harry. I know it's even more of a draw to do that because of the current situation, but honestly, straight away we will see whether that you want to be with us. You can see that proactivity, you can see that motivation and interest straight away on an application form, especially one like ours is very short, so you can see quite quickly if someone's actually bothered to put the time in. And actually what you'll find is a lot of us have ATSs, and we can see how long you spend on your application form as well. So just bear that one in mind. I don't judge people on it, because I know you can copy and paste and put into Word, but you can tell quite quickly when someone's actually spent some time on your application. And yeah, don't wait until the deadline would be great for me. Just throwing that in there for my own personal sanity. Just because there's a deadline doesn't mean that you have to work to the deadline. And there's no sort of right or wrong time really to submit an application. But honestly, this year I thought I was doing really well and thought we were on target until the last 2 days. And I think that was when the majority of the applications suddenly came flowing in. So if you are bored in your bedroom and you've got a spare 5 minutes and you think that doesn't look like a very long application, let's knock that one out. Please don't, would be my plea.
I think in all the years I've been on TARGETjobs Law, some of those are the absolute height. Same concerns. Don't put the wrong firm name on there. Please don't submit it 30 seconds before midnight on the day that it's due. All really, really useful advice. And it was actually quite positive to hear you say, now we've adapted to digital and everything else. Because I think when we were doing these kind of sessions last year, it was a case of, hey, we're still getting used to this. Like we're not sure quite how to recruit when we've got people here and people there, and it might take a little bit longer for you to get replies. The idea of feedback webinars sounds just, I mean, that's really phenomenal, because it is so difficult when you don't get that feedback to improve. And as you say, the key is not to submit the same application and expect a different outcome. You have to look at how you're going to improve, and either you can get that from the employer or from the firm, or you have to go to your family members, to your friends. Just try to find a way to employ it. Think yourself, how can I make this more, how can I improve on this, so that each application is better than the last, and don't get downhearted when you get the rejections. We've had interviewees for TARGETjobs Law who've said, it took me 5 tries to get pupillage, or it took me 3 years before I got accepted onto a training contract. Like, it is standard. And at the moment things are really, really competitive. That is the big change of the pandemic, is you've got a lot more people out there going for perhaps a smaller number of jobs or different types of jobs. So do be ready for it. Thank you so much. And really, brilliant advice that has evolved from last year. Thankfully, something's evolved. So I just want to turn to our question list, and I'm going to go down this in order of upvotes. I won't read out anybody's name, because we do record these for YouTube, and I don't want to accidentally name fully name someone. Well, that's going to be recorded. So the first one we've got is, how can we use our experience of writing assignments and completing a dissertation remotely during a pandemic, i.e. to emphasize that we have had to work under super stressful conditions? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, no, it's really good, and a very good point, because though again it's kind of that reflective piece of, you're kind of going through your day to day and thinking, oh, I'm not learning anything from this, so I'm not taking anything from that, I'm just basically doing my job or my study. But you're taking so much away, and especially when you're having to migrate to different ways of working, there's lots of other things that are going on around you that you wouldn't normally have to distract you as well. So family members, dog's coughing. I've just been chatting to Matt about my dog, who encroaches on some of the conversations that I have with his bronchitis. But there's lots going on, and I think when you take some time and take stock, things like saying, right, I had to write an assignment with a house full of people isolating. I needed to change the way that I organize myself. I needed to understand what my motivators were, because actually the ones that would be in the library with friends who are going through the same course, and therefore we can lean on each other, don't have that. That has been taken away from me. What have I put in place instead? So again, the reason we have life history is that the header can be education, and you can talk about that. And again, it's important. Sort of life experience is how do you write? How do you change your style of writing? Because moving from A level to university, this is the first year. I think everyone worries because it's like, oh, first year doesn't count necessarily towards your degree classification, but it's the only modules that we get to see as law firms. First year to me is how you integrate with what's going on with the university life. How do you write something? How do they want something set out? And you've just missed that if you've gone into first year, that you've lost all of your sort of weeks of getting to know people, to form those relationships, to form those friendship groups, to form the support groups that you would normally have. You don't have that. You've gone through a massive change, and I think you should talk about that on your application, and that aspect of having to change how you study and the way that you work is a great example of that. And that's something that we've all had to do. Those who are in the office, we've had to change the way and adapt the way that we work as well. So you can see how that can mirror and be a good thing with regards to coming into the world of work as well. Oh, I think Matt's frozen. Hi, Matt.
Hello, apologies. I think we're having some connection difficulties, and my screen has gone a bit funny.
I can see you now.
Okay, there we go. Hopefully that will hang tough for a little bit. Joanne, I'm sorry. Did you manage to get to the end of that without any interruption?
Yeah, no, I think I was fine. Hopefully.
Sorry, because it is really useful. Like, as you were saying, articulate how you've had to deal with these situations. Like, if you are working under stressful conditions, we always talk about the STAR method on TARGETjobs: situation, task, action, result. The situation will be the problem that you had while you were trying to get the work done. Maybe you couldn't track down a lecturer that you needed to talk to get advice on something. What did you do? How did you approach that? What did you do? And what was the result when you finally got to the end of it? I think just being able to articulate that kind of thing can make you if you can identify those problems, can make you stronger when you're applying, I would say. Mm-hmm. But obviously you don't want to delve too much into just the fact that university is difficult anyway, because you're learning something new. But I just think if you can look at articulate accurately your processes, the things that you've done, which tap into resilience and into managing stressful situations and things like that, I think that could be really helpful. So I hope that answers your question. On the feed, as I say, I won't read out names. We talked a little bit about LinkedIn profiles and not stalking people, so I think we're going to gloss over that one. You can also look at, we've got articles on TARGETjobs, and go back to our past webinars page as well for more advice. We did talk a little bit about online courses, free online courses. I mean, you said you're in the middle of a recruitment process earlier on the stream. Are you getting a lot of online courses being listed on CVs?
Not a huge amount. I think because the CVs were kind of when things were just starting to kind of to kick off, so there wasn't a huge amount there. But I think just in general, even before all of this happened, and what I found is that all of the technology that we're using now was there before all of this happened. We just didn't use it to the best of its abilities or effectiveness. And we always had Skype and you could always see somebody if you wanted to, but nobody ever did. Now everyone just turns their camera on. And so actually the online courses from Open University, there's quite a lot of courses that you can go on and just do free bits and pieces I just think are really interesting. And again, it doesn't have to be law related. It can be, this is an opportunity to learn something that you actually had a real interest in, but you've never had the time to spend doing that. I think we're coming out of it slightly, that we all kind of are now pushed for time a little bit. But for me, I just think if you're interested in learning, which most people are, especially if you're interested in law, because that's part of the draw to it. It's ever changing and you're always having to learn. But there's a lot that you can do, and probably a lot that you are doing naturally just out of your own curiosity that you're not putting on your CV, because you just think, oh, well, it's not got anything to do with the job that I'm applying for, or it's not work experience, it's not employment, it's not this. But still put it on there. As I say, I know with our application, it's a lot easier because it's framed in a way that we encourage you to do that. But you could still put it on all of the applications and CVs. You just need to be a bit more creative with the headers and how you put it on there. But yeah, anything that you can do that's in, let's say, learning, TED Talks, Eventbrite, all of that, really interesting stuff that you can just do in your own time that you have a genuine interest in, can all go on your CV. But I think a lot of candidates have and will continue to self-edit and not put anything on that they don't think's relevant. But actually the stuff that you're leaving off is probably the most relevant things, because it tends to be the one that makes you an individual and tells us a little bit more about your personality and makes you different to the 2,663rd person that I've just read the application from, because you've done something different to them.
Thank you. That's definitely very true. I mean, it does stand out. And even if you meet someone at Insight Day and they say, "Oh, well, yes, but of course, because I do, panda wrestling in my free time," you maybe there is some skill set that you're getting out of that, but you just remember it because it's kind of an interesting. Okay, this person has an outside hobby. The one we had from a pupillage fair a few years ago was someone was a professional gin taster. And they'd actually managed it. So obviously it stuck with the barrister who remembered it, because gin was an up and coming thing. But it was also, because it's all very ordered and there are sets of rules and there are meetings and there's a lot of other sort of softer skills that come around it that sort of blended together. So yeah, definitely. Thank you. I think it's really, as you say, really useful to try and show a bit of your personality as well. And then if you've got some softer skills around that, that just adds to your application as a whole. So are there any other webinars available that you would recommend for people who have social issues such as a lack of social skills? Do you have any recommendations, Joanne?
Yeah, I can't think of any specific webinars, but I'm sure there probably is. I mean, the world of Google is huge, so just pop it in there. But it is difficult, and I think people forget that that sort of social skill set is quite difficult, because we're not all necessarily comfortable doing that. And we always talk about wanting diverse groups of people, diverse ways of thinking coming through. And therefore, again, the way that I try and structure our recruitment process is to try and give a platform for everyone who are more introverted or extroverted, to be able to demonstrate what they can bring to the business. And if you're somebody who's naturally quite not antisocial, but quite socially awkward, it is difficult during assessment days. And for me, pre-pandemic, I would say get yourself out there, go and push yourself outside your comfort zone, go and join different societies and go to networking events, junior lawyer divisions. There's a few where you can actually join as student members. There's probably a lot of things online now that you can do with regards to junior lawyers and what have you. And I would suggest you go and try and find out if there are some things. Eventbrite I've already spoken about, but there's a lot of still networking type events that you can go to that might be online. And actually that might be a much nicer transition for somebody who's not particularly comfortable in social settings, because you're starting to see familiar faces, you can just observe people. So something like Matt and I just having conversations, you can see how people just engage, and you can start feeling a lot more comfortable with that. As strange as it may sound, I actually detest doing presentations and going to networking events, because I personally find it quite difficult sometimes to walk into a room with people who you don't know. you just think, right, okay, how do I start this conversation? And sometimes it is just walking up and smiling and saying hello. And do you know what, remembering that people are just as nervous as you are, and they are probably feeling exactly the same way that you are. So there will be lots of different types of webinars out there that will support you with that, because I know there's a lot around kind of dealing with anxiety and mental health and what have you. And sometimes it's just nice to hear that actually other people are going through those same situations and thoughts that you are as well. So there will be quite a lot out there. I can't recommend one off the top of my head, but certainly for me, just doing that research and finding things for yourself, you'll very much, there will be resource out there for you. But what I want to kind of stress as well is, don't worry when you're coming into situations like recruitment. We already know that it's stressful and it can knock your confidence. And we are very much there, as I said before, to facilitate and to make you feel as comfortable as possible. So if you're happy to kind of speak to your recruiter and say, actually, I find social situations a little bit difficult, at least engaging with the recruiter, you've got somebody that you know already going through the process with you that might start to help you feel a lot more comfortable. And we know there's lots of people who are kind of, especially with regards to like neurodiversity, who will struggle to articulate themselves, who may struggle with larger groups of people, or would prefer to have a kind of space to time out before they move on to different exercises. Honestly, you just let us know what we can do to make sure that situation helps to make sure that you're in that sort of positive mindset, because it helps you through your recruitment process. But you just need to lean on us as well. So we very much appreciate that kind of social aspect, especially now when we're all sort of desocialized because we haven't been able to socialize. It's even harder to kind of get back into that and to start to understand what's socially acceptable. Do I shake hands? Do I bump shoulders? Do I do this? What do I do? We're all kind of going through it. So as much as I can't recommend one, I'm sure I'd put my house on it, there will be at least one webinar that's based on that.
There are all some really useful points. And like, as you say, you know, it takes every kind of person to work in a firm or to work in a company. You know, you need people who are introverted, you need people who are extroverts. You know, you shouldn't sort of disqualify yourself based on anything like that. Yeah. There are a couple of webinars I could recommend on TARGETjobs. Obviously, we don't go into the sort of mental health aspect of that. We leave that to Student Minds, and you can see Student Minds speaking on one of our webinars if you go to the past employability webinars page. There's also one on the TARGETjobs YouTube on resilience, which I highly recommend, which talks a lot about the growth mindset. I think it was with a lady from KPMG. And I thought that was really useful. A lot of things she was talking about how you adjust yourself to adapt to challenges and things, I thought was really, really good. There are obviously podcasts are another a great way to sort of, I think there are a lot that cover various different social skills and including mental health topics. You've got like The Hilarious World of Depression, where I think they interview someone who's usually quite famous every week, and they talk a little bit about their experiences and how they've dealt with life to that stage. So as Joanne said, go out there and do your research. There's a couple of little sort of recommendations if you have the time, but obviously find one that's relevant for you, and to do that you need to know yourself inside out. So we've got just sort of 5 minutes left, just going to get through a couple more questions. I think this is hopefully quite a straightforward one. I've been producing music for a while. Will that add value to my CV?
Yes. In the short answer, yeah. I mean, I think that just highlights everything that we've said. Honestly, one, that's a great talking point, because I could talk about music till the cows come home, because I absolutely love it. Not to the extent of producing it, but I'm an avid listener with quite an eclectic taste. And it is a great conversation starter as well. But again, you think about, if you break down actually what that means by producing music, you're dealing with all of the technical aspects of it, but it can be quite emotive when you're dealing with somebody else's music, and it's very much based around kind of their own experiences, and you're dealing with artists which I think are sort of known for being quite dramatic, and so there's so much you can take away from just that. I'm just making a lot of assumptions just off that question alone, but there must be so much you could talk about, and will be great on your CV. And I'd put money on the fact that you probably haven't put it on any of your CVs because you don't think it's relevant to the law, whereas actually there'll be so much that you could bring forward. And don't just talk about your transferable skill sets. Talk about how it's developed you as an individual, how it's made you feel, how you'll really personalize it, and that will certainly stand out on a CV.
Thank you. Absolutely. I don't think there would be a hobby that came up on in that question bar that we would say avoid, unless it was really something quite unsavory. So another hopefully quite straightforward one: are non-law graduates welcome to apply for internships or this would be vacation schemes and gain experience?
Yes, please. Yeah, more non-lawyers the better. I think for me, law students great, but non-lawyers, you come with maybe a more holistic approach to things. You're coming at it from a slightly different angle. But yeah, we would very much welcome non-law students come and join the vacation scheme and consider a training contract, because again, we don't work in a vacuum. We need people who are interested in things that are not necessarily just the legal aspect. You bring a lot with you. So yes, please do feel free to apply.
Thank you very much. As I say, I was hoping that would be quite a straightforward one.
Yeah.
And the very last one that I think we've got time to cover, and I have a standard disclaimer for this one, but I'll see if Joanne has a similar thing. How are international students treated in terms of landing training contracts?
You're exactly the same way on. We're responsible with the Home Office, so we just look at your application the same way as any other application, so we can do all of that for you. That's fine. What I will say is sometimes with international students, what I find is you need to understand why you're applying to the firm. So I think especially with a firm like ours, we have a London office, and I saw a question about London trainees. Yeah, the secondments aren't just London trainees, they're very much the whole of WBD. But people will just want to work in London. And if that's the reason you're applying for us, because you want to work in London, I'm going to hand on heart, you're not going to be successful. We want you to work for WBD, and it happens to be in London, not wanting to stay there. So just bear that one in mind. Sometimes it is quite a lot of international students who don't look around the firm as a whole. It's more about, I want to stay where I am, so therefore I'm just going to apply to everybody who has an office here. So you do need to make sure that you're applying to WBD or any other law firm, not just the location that you want to apply to.
Thank you very much. Absolutely excellent to hear you say that, because I think that is something that really does need to be covered. Tailor your application to where you want to work, not the city that you want to work in. And the standard disclaimer I always give to international students is you always, I think in this country you are treated the same as any other candidate. All candidates who apply for a job are given unbiased kind of treatment when they're going through the application process. The only thing you have to bear in mind is whether, if you need a visa, you need to ask the firm whether they will cover you for visas. Joanne's already clarified that. But always bear that in mind and reach out to the recruiters if you're not sure. Don't submit an application and then demand afterwards that someone sponsors you for a visa if it may not be an option. So thank you very much for that question. We are just about out of time. I just wanted to say, Joanne, is there any way you'd like to direct people to? Because I can see you've still got a few more WBD specific questions in the sidebar.
Yeah, so by all means, either link in, so I am on there and I will answer your questions, or you can, all of my contact details are on the website as well. But honestly, happy to answer any questions that you have. And it doesn't just have to be about WBD. I'm happy to be a sounding board for kind of any aspect of the recruitment process, not just law as well. So yeah, please do stay in touch.
And thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really, really interesting session, and you've given some really, really useful advice, I think. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Well, good luck, everyone.
If you have found this webinar useful, please let us know in the chat, because it's quite difficult because we obviously can't see you, but you can see us. So just drop a little message so we can see, and please say a big thank you to Joanne for coming on to talk to you today. I think our next webinar is on the 8th of July, where we're talking about what jobs you can do with a humanities degree. So please do come back for that if you can. I hope you all have a good afternoon, and we'll see you in the next one.
All right,
Bye-bye.
take care. Bye.